Until recently, Turkish Prime Minister Recep Erdogan's 10 years in office have been relatively peaceful. His reforms have been welcome, and the country has positioned itself as a bridge between the East and the West. But the government is increasingly seen as high-handed and disconnected from its people. Joining us now in studio, Tuncay Babalı. He is the Turkish ambassador to Canada. And Mr. Ambassador, we're happy to welcome you back to TVO.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Well, let's start with this. What's the government's official position on what's going on over there right now?
Well, it started, as you know, as a peaceful environmentalist demonstration to what's known Gezi Park now. And government actually made a campaign in the 2011 elections, which the current government won with 51% of the votes, saying that Gezi Park would be turned into a reenacted or replica of an Ottoman-era architecturally beautiful building that would be placed there. But some environmentalists disagreed, and when there was a pending court case, actually, there was no interim decision yet, and they invaded Gezi Park, occupied Gezi Park, like Occupy Wall Street.
But you'll agree that it's more than that now, though.
Of course, I would say, but after 3 years of peaceful, protest, police intervened on the 31st of May. And that is now accepted by the government and the officials that, that was a mistake. And police heavy-handedness sparked a major demonstrations in Turkey. And, some dozens of other cities joined the protests because of the police excessive use of force there. And immediately afterwards, they were ordered to withdraw both from Gezi Park and Taksim Square.
The suggestion is they were too heavy-handed in the first place.
That's correct.
On the orders of the government.
That's correct.
So you are acknowledging the government pushed this too hard, too fast.
They admit that they did right now. And the Deputy Prime Minister apologized for that, for good-intentioned people. But later on, it turned out to be, and this is the 11th year in the government party, and it's only normal for youngsters who haven't seen any other government in power in their formation years took the streets and expressed their concerns against government, their dissent. And our president said that, message is well taken. And Prime Minister said this also. But the thing is, and they were untouched for 10 days or so in the Taksim Square. And afterwards, Taksim Square, which was not originally place of the demonstration, was cleaned up from demonstrators. But Gezi Park, again, weren't touched by any government or police there.
You were just there, right?
Yes, I was there.
You've just been to Turkey?
Yeah, I was with the Air Canada's inaugural flight to Istanbul. And
you went to Taksim Square?
I did, and it was peaceful at the time. I walked with the demonstrators who were there, actually. But there wasn't much event that you could watch, actually. But on the 13th of, night of 13th, Prime Minister ultimately met with the demonstrators. Those Taksim platform, those are the group of NGOs. Some of them are illegal, I must say. Those are 126 NGOs were originally on this platform. But Prime Minister met with them at the 10 p.m. Until 3:30 in the morning of June 14th. And they agreed on the following. Nothing would happen to Gezi Park. Actually, the day police intervened, which was very unfortunate, the court ordered stay of execution decision. And until the court decision is finalized, nothing will happen with Gezi Park. That was the agreed one.
Do you think, Ambassador, this threatens the legitimacy of the Erdogan government?
I don't think so. This is not about the legitimacy of it. You must understand that this is the third time elected by increasing their votes. And his popularity rating was by Pew, not the Turkish public opinion pollers, was 62% before the event started, because he was given a credit to take on the Kurdish issue, PKK issue, and the decommissioning of arms with the terrorists, actually. And none of the governments ever tried that before. And he was given a credit for that, and his approval rating was rising. But this is an issue of maturity of the Turkish democracy, actually. We are getting at the next level of our democracy voyage, And people are much more sophisticated, much more informed. They want not just the ballot box to be put in front of them. They want the dissenting opinions to be accommodated somehow in the democracy as well.
Let me ask you about that, because, of course, last time you were here a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the fact that some in the West are uncomfortable about Turkey's potentially joining the European Union.
Right.
And I wonder if you're concerned that all of what has transpired over the past couple of weeks will make those people say, you see, they're not really in favor of free speech and freedom of assembly. We can't have them in the EU.
I do agree in a sense that, you know, there is this really mixed picture in front of those, and there are, you know, some mischaracterizations about Turkey as well. It's no, I mean, there are a really large portion of the Turkish population thinks that, you know, this situation was exploited to cast a shadow over Turkish, you know, voyage towards becoming the first-class, you know, economic power, democracy in the world.
Exploited by whom?
You know, some of the you know, reports came out from it was making a lot of you know, things as if that it was sounded that a new Turkish spring is at the door. Has nothing to do with it. Our spring came in 1946 and 1950 elections. I mean, it's nothing to do with the Arab Spring or to be mixed with that. This is something else about the maturity of our politics. I know that there is an opportunity and responsibility now for me here in Canada and for government officials to re-engage with all our partners globally. Actually, NATO, we are a steadfast NATO ally. We will remain to do so. And we will be striving to become a full member of the EU, no matter how hard it is. The road is important.
None of this changes any of that?
None of it changes.
So just tell us in our last minute here, how does this resolve itself? Because at the moment it still looks very unresolved.
Well, the thing is that there will be 2 elections in 7 months in Turkey. You know, there will be local elections, which will be, of course, will be seen as a vote of confidence for this government. Actually, the Prime Minister, you know, realizing this, launched his campaign already. You know, he took the streets in Istanbul and gathered in Ankara first, his rally this weekend, gathered 250,000 people. In Istanbul, over 1 million actually supporters gathered in his rally.
We're about to actually conduct a debate here in which we're going to show some pictures of that.
Yeah.
So if you want to watch the rest of that,
I will do that. And I think that, you know, important thing is to strike a right balance with our freedoms and the security of all Turks here. That's important, and I am happy about that. You know, the youngsters actually brought a new civil society into fruition in Turkey, and that will take us a much more, you know, stable and stronger democracy in the future.
Okay. Ambassador Babala, we thank you very much for coming into TVO tonight and sharing your views with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Just before we engage in the debate here, we are going to broaden the discussion, but we want to share with you a timeline of events that have happened in Turkey that have brought us to this day. For example, November 8th, 2012, Istanbul's mayor announces the plans for a shopping mall and rebuilt artillery barracks to be built in the location of Gezi Park, adjacent to Taksim Square. May 27 of this year, Taksim Solidarity, an activist group against the development, blocks bulldozers which were there to cut down trees in the park. The next day, the police moved in on the protesters, spraying tear gas. The so-called woman in red photo goes viral as a symbol of the excessive use of police force on peaceful protesters. June 1st, Prime Minister Erdogan remains defiant against the protests, and the protests spread to 67 cities. June 2nd, President Gül announces the message of the protesters was received, and he urges the people to remain calm. June the 4th, Turkey's Deputy Prime Minister apologizes for the excessive use of police force on protesters. June the 11th, riot police enter Taksim Square after a 10-day détente in the harshest crackdown so far, and the police use tear gas and water cannon. June 13th, Erdogan meets with representatives of the protests and agrees to suspend the demolition of Gezi Park. June 15th, police clear Taksim Gezi Park of protesters, ending the occupation. Police stand guard at Taksim Square to prevent any gathering there. June 18th, 84 people arrested for participating in the protests. Total number detained to date, 3,300. Injured, more than 7,800. Fatalities, 6. And we want to show you 2 images that have become very iconic throughout this whole piece. This so-called woman in red on the receiving end of that spray from that police officer there. This has gone viral all over the world. And one more, which was in, I suspect, most of the newspapers of the world today, simply called Standing Man. No signs, no shouting of protests, just standing to show his opposition to what has been transpiring. All right, let's get into all this now. Let's welcome Ozey Mehmet. He is Professor Emeritus of Economics at the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, Carleton University, Ottawa. Tosun Başali, Professor of Political Science at King's University College at Western University, London, Ontario. Besma Momani, Senior Fellow at CIGI, the Centre for International Governance Innovation in Waterloo. And Nergis Canifek. She is Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science and Public Law at York University. Good of all of you to come in tonight for this discussion, and I would like to, Besma, get us started here. I want to know one reason from everybody as we go around the table why so many people have gone out and publicly protested in Turkey. One reason.
Rapid urban development, really fast with not enough public consultation. And it's really, I think, attracted the attention of many people, whether we're talking about Brazil today or what we're looking at happening in Istanbul and previous to that in the Arab Spring. People want to be consulted, I think, is the core of the issue.
Nergis, another explanation.
Similar but a little different constitutional reconciliation process, which has been rather checkered.
Ozey?
To me, this represents a confrontation between secularism and authoritarian rule.
That's very provocative. Okay, we'll unpack some of that as we go along. Tosun, how about you?
Frustration with the direction of the Erdogan government.
That picks up more on what Ozey had to say.
That's right, yes.
All right, fill in the blanks a little bit more on that. This is obviously, and the ambassador admitted it here, more than just a discussion about the park. Absolutely. And the environmental issues.
The park was really the tipping point. There are multiple reasons why other people have been unhappy about the direction of the Erdogan government. He's seen to be more authoritarian, less sensitive to numerous important groups within Turkish society.
Do you agree with that characterization?
I do, actually, yes. But I have to say that he wasn't always very authoritarian and confrontational.
So something's changed?
Something has changed since the last election, since 2011. He's become more self-confident, more self-righteous, and more authoritarian.
Besma, would you agree?
Yeah, I think you can see in his style. I mean, some people might even say arrogant. He's increasingly become more arrogant, and even in his public speeches, you can see, even not being a native Turkish speaker, one can see just as his style is almost yelling at this point, and I think that really turns off a lot of people. And he's definitely confident. He's had a third term, and he feels very strong.
Ozey, do you agree?
Yes, I think this is substantially about his personality and style of leadership. Here's a proud man. He has transformed the Turkish economy and wants now to become the second Atatürk, or maybe even replace the founder of modern Turkey. And the demonstrators on the street see him as crossing a line.
They're not comfortable with the notion that he sees himself as a modern-day Ataturk in terms of his position in history.
Probably he sees or would like to see himself more. He is articulating increasingly in a daring way neo-Ottomanism.
Okay, Nergis, what's your view on whether or not Erdogan sees himself as kind of the modern-day Ataturk and belongs with that kind of reputation in history?
Personally, I'm not concerned with him, more so about the changes in the administrative and public law and the changes in the state structure. And it looks like the state-society relations at this point are really very tense, because you have a massive centralized state with very little, if any, access by the civilians to the state, no tribunal mechanisms, very little review processes left. And we just got the news that a new law got the third reading about the State Intelligence Agency having the goal to join together all the information belonging to ordinary citizens who have no criminal record whatsoever, and the state having full access to all private information, regardless of the Criminal Code 57, and also the banking code.
Well, I don't want to push this too far, but we've seen some of that in the United States in the last little while, too.
Exactly, this is what I'm trying to get to. And then I'm just going to mention that in Canada, you just had a bill read about banning of the masks in public protests. So what I'm seeing is not so much Erdogan. It looks like there's something going on about the state becoming a very, very active actor in privatization and change of economy and society.
Besma, how do you think Erdogan is faring in terms of respecting the civil liberties of his citizens?
Well, I mean, you know, Turkey still is a democracy, and I think that, you know, one could look at what's happened in the past few days and really see, I think, you know, many would agree, a heavy-handed response. There needs to be an investigation after all of the, you know, dust has been settled into how the police have really handled this, and I think quite poorly at that. But at the end of the day, you know, Turkey is a democracy. I think what we're pointing out to is a challenge of many democracies, and how do you balance the need for public safety, the reality that increasingly many of these countries do have threats, either internal or external. Turkey is no exception to, for example, terrorist attacks from a number of sources. But at the same time, the reality that a democracy means respect for human rights and civil liberties and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. All of these are really important principles. And I think, you know, Turkey, like many other states, I mean, one needs to look more at Europe, which is really in this constraint today, where they are increasingly have governments that are acting in often ways against the will of the people for the economic crisis that they're facing. So, you know, it's a challenge of democracies. I think Turkey is really in the fold of its many European companies.
Tosin, how about the role of the media? Are the media's rights to do their job respected adequately in Turkey right now?
Well, they actually got a lousy mark from the protesters in Turkey, because some of the media outlets were actually giving very little coverage to the protests. So the media is not doing as well as one would expect from a liberal democracy of the kind that we have in the Western world. I should add, by the way, that one of the shortcomings of the Erdogan government is that it doesn't respect the freedom of the media adequately. I don't mean by this that the media is totally muffled, not at all. But Erdogan has had this bad habit of actually castigating journalists who attack his policies, even, you know, his own conduct.
Well, every leader does that, don't they?
Well, yes, but not every leader actually habitually comes out and publicly condemns journalists or media outlets. The other thing about Erdogan is he's a remarkably thin-skinned politician. He has been suing a lot of people for defamation of character. Now,
we should point out, I guess I should say, and Jose, let me get your comment on this. Our previous guest here, Ambassador Babalab, was on the phones apparently 5 minutes after those two CBC journalists were arrested, and dealing with John Baird's office, the foreign minister, dealing with the broadcast authorities and the foreign ministry in Turkey, and got them sprung, I guess, after about a half a day or so locked up. Do they get points for that?
You mean for
well, we have to make
in the first place?
Not for locking them up in the first place, but by resolving it quickly and with nobody getting harmed at the end of the day.
We have to make a distinction here, Steve, between the domestic press media and foreign.
Okay.
The problem with Erdogan's approach to domestic media has been one of confrontational over the past several months, maybe in the last year and a half in particular. There are too many reporters in jail, you know, and there are all kinds of restrictions on freedom of expression. Mm-hmm. This is on the negative side. Coming to the, and some people, in fact, go so far as to claim that there is censorship. Okay? But I must say I'm a little bit worried, and I must say I agree with Besma. Turkey is a functioning democracy. Mm-hmm. Not perfect, but you show me a perfect democracy, including Canada. We have our problems here with authoritarian rule as well. We've had G20 demonstrations and police using excessive force. This is, whether we like it or not, part of the way in which democratic process is evolving. In Turkey, unfortunately, the social discourse, the social dialogue is a new phenomenon. Okay? And whether it is environmentalism or women's issues or democratic participation. What really ought to have remained at the municipal level, because your timeline began very correctly, saying that look, this was a town planning issue in Istanbul.
Yes.
Okay? But because of the personality and the management style of Erdogan, it really, as soon as he stepped in, it became a national issue.
Well, let's...
and the foreign media, first of all, they were late coming to cover the issue. They were late to get interested in this very significant event. You know, I see it as a challenge of democracy, with very strong Atatürkist, secularist undertones, versus the hidden agenda of Prime Minister Erdogan.
Okay, let me get to this, though, if I can, because we want to show, the ambassador mentioned that he'd had some demonstrations lately which showed overwhelming support. We've got some pictures of this. Let's put it up, and I'll ask you, Nergis, as you look at these pictures, you know, 250,000 people showing up to support the Prime Minister.
How common is it for a Prime Minister who is meant to represent and take into account everybody's interests at a time of civil unrest to organize a rally with his supporters?
So you're not buying?
No, the supporters are there, but the gesture I find dangerous because it's very prohibitive and punitive, considering the fact that a lot of the people who were actually demonstrating were very young and this was their first encounter with politics. Why there was a need for that kind of mass rally? And what was the message exactly? I don't think the message was reconciliation and let's sit around the table. The message was, I'm in majority. And he's in his third term, and probably he's looking into going into a fourth term. How common is it in a democracy for a prime minister to sit for 5 terms? So these are some issues that...
I mean, it doesn't happen in the United States because they have term limits, but in the rest of... Yes, it's not that unusual in Canada.
I think there's a reason for term limits, and then the magic of democracy is actually recirculation and opening up of new facilities and then new discourses, right? So if somebody stays in power for 12, 20, 25 years, there's another name for that system.
Tosin, do you think he's personally likable?
No doubt about it. I mean, he has a huge following, and those pictures that were shown on the screen actually are very telling. That he has huge support, particularly in Anatolia, and he wanted to show off. But I agree with Nergis that this is polarizing. That really he should be reaching out to the people who are ambivalent about him, who are opposed to him, and so on. I want to pick up on what Nergis said about his bid to have additional terms. This is part of the reasons why there are some Turks, or many Turks, who are unhappy about him. Because he has ambitions to be the next president, and not only that, but to change the constitution to confer on the presidency additional executive powers, because essentially, as it is today, the presidency is a ceremonial position with reserve powers. But he wants to strengthen that. And
does that concern you?
It concerns me, given the kind of direction that he has been pursuing since he was re-elected for a 3rd term. And given the kind of intolerant posture that he has adopted since these protests began. And it isn't just me who is concerned about it. Obviously, very large numbers of Turks are concerned about it.
Let me ask
I should also add, by the way, that his dreams to become a president with additional executive powers are no longer realizable. Yeah. Because he needs to have a constitutional change to confer those powers on the presidency, and he doesn't have enough of a majority. He has a majority, but he doesn't have enough of a majority to be able to take the issue to a referendum. So that dream has gone down, down the well.
Do you agree with that? That a more muscular presidency is now beyond his grasp?
I think it's going to be definitely more difficult to do. I mean, the negotiations were already quite problematic beforehand. But I think, to the point that's being said here, he is popular. It's just the country is polarized. The country's been polarized since the AK party won in the first place. I mean, there is this deep undercurrent both, you know, sentiment of resentment of secularists against many of the AK Party, that they are taking the country into a dangerously more religious way. And that really surfaces. I mean, you don't have to be long in Turkey to see this kind of simmering resentment. Some of it is a rural-urban. I mean, Anatolians have come, you know, somehow that these, even though, you know, Mr. Erdogan himself is from Istanbul, that said, there is this feeling that somehow these, you know, country folk have come and taken over, you know, what many of the liberal elite city people had, you know, occupied, which was a space of really the intellectual thought of Turkey that looked at an Ataturkian kind of vision. So there's a real undercurrent of, I think, resentment. It's a very divided society in terms of how they see Turkey, the very core of it.
But Jose, would you say that under his decade in power, for most Turks, life is better?
Yes, I would. Let me give you some figures. And
sure.
But let me preface by saying that Erdogan's credibility, which has now taken a beating, I agree with what Tuzun has said. His popularity, his credibility, really derives significantly from his economic performance. And here is a leader that won 3 elections. Okay? In 10 years ago, the rate of inflation in Turkey was approaching 100%. Today, it's about 6%. The exchange rate 10 years ago was 1,500,000 TL to the dollar. Today, it is 1.85 in that area. Net national income per capita was about 4,000. Now it is about in excess of 12,000. If you do it on a PPP basis, it is more 15,000. Okay? The economy has grown by an average of at least 5% a year. The trade imbalance as a ratio of GDP, the national income, has gone down from way above 10% to just about 6%. And the critical point is about 7%. So the economy, both in terms of domestic performance as well as external trade, external economic relations, has significantly improved, and much of the credit belongs to Erdogan.
That's what I was going to ask. Nergis, does he get the credit for that?
I think he should. And I want to qualify my earlier comment about him being re-elected for a 4th or 5th term. The issue is not about the credibility or legitimacy of AKP as far as I'm concerned. They do represent large portions of the society, and since they came to power, a lot of constitutional change and processes took place that were unimaginable before. So they opened up quite a few doors, both in the area of economics as well as social reform and reconciliation with the minorities. So these are huge gains, and there's a stabilization of the general environment. The problem seems to be the over-burgeoning capacities of the police force, perhaps because of a sense of threat that the government might be seeing. And it's almost become the balancing point for the overactive army. And as far as I'm concerned, as a constitutional law person, neither of them should be without checks and balances. This is a public accountability issue.
Okay, but Tuzun, I want to get us back to the economy here for a second, which is, you know, the suggestion is that the economic miracle, if you want to call it that, in Turkey came quickly, and if things don't settle down, could just as quickly end quickly. Do you think so?
Well, I don't know about how quickly it would end. There's no doubt, by the way, that the economy has performed exceptionally well. And I think that's the main reason why the Justice and Development Party under Erdogan has been elected and re-elected time and again. People are doing better. And you know, he has brought stability to Turkey. Yeah. Before him, there was a decade of coalition governments that lasted on average 18 months. So you had one coalition government after another. There were a lot of cases of corruption that really made the people very, very unhappy. So they welcomed the AKP, and they've actually, you know, their performance has been cleaner.
But you think this economic growth is stable and predictable at this point?
Well, that's the part I want to come to, because we already see some damage to Turkish tourism. And because Erdogan actually has been lashing out at foreign financial interests that are trying to exploit the current crisis, he may be discouraging foreign investment, so that the relatively minor economic damage that Turkey is now experiencing may become lasting. We won't know until later.
Sure. Besma, how about the Kurdish minority? How well have they been treated under Erdogan's leadership?
Well, better. I mean, you know, this is not an optimal, there's no multiculturalism in Turkey. I mean, that's still a far project to be achieved. But, you know, I think that the Kurds would say that things have improved. Everything from finally allowing Kurdish language to be spoken, some segment of Kurdish shows being shown on public television. These were all unheard of before. Even just saying the word Kurdish, I mean, Kurds is finally being recognized. And part of that too, and some of that is economic, because they're able to really reach out to the Kurdish regional government of Iraq, which they're very heavily dependent on for energy, and that's probably one of the biggest drains on the Turkish government in terms of balance of payments. That's really, I think, that, you know, the reason why that you've really seen this. And ultimately, I mean, the Kurdish minority, which is quite sizable, in some accounts almost up to 20%, are very happy to see this progress. But obviously, they want much more. And many of them will, I think, call for much more in the time to come.
Jose?
Steve, on this question of who should get the credit for what you call the Turkish economic miracle,
Okay.
we have to acknowledge the significant, vital contribution of Kemal Dervish. In fact, he's the architect of the Turkish miracle. Turkish economy was a basket case around 2001, okay? And the prime minister at that time was Ecevit, and he brought in from the World Bank Kemal Dervish, a very eminent, internationally well-known economist, Kemal Dervish. He reformed the Turkish banking system, the Turkish finance, and in my opinion, the greatest achievement of Erdogan and AKP in the last 10 years is that they did not dismantle what Kemal Dervish established. Okay? They build on this solid foundation, and today the Turkish Central Bank, which is independent thanks to the reform that was initiated by Kemal Dervish, and the Turkish finances, the public budget is all stronger because AKP Erdogan has really exercised discipline and put in place an exemplary economic team.
Okay, let me jump in here because we're down to our last few minutes, and I want to get all of you to comment on something that the ambassador said when he was here about 25 minutes ago, that he said this is not a Turkish spring in the same way we just saw an Arab spring over the last couple of years. He really rejected that analogy. What do you think?
In the Arab Spring, there's a very strong class component. And I think, as much as this is not Arab Spring, there is a class component in this because of the privatization and because of some of the neoliberal policies. It's not as widespread, and it certainly doesn't have the same characteristics, because this is not about toppling down the government or changing the state structure. But there is this consent on the street, and I think part of the issue has to do with the censorship in good faith measures, and the panic and the instinct to quieten anything that happens on the street. And your images of the standing man is a point to that. Streets have to be allowed to exist, and I think maybe at that level it's not an Arab Spring, but certainly it's something else that's happening in Turkey, hopefully, which will be better in the long run.
Tosin, a Turkish spring, yes or no?
No, actually, because, you know, as Besma has pointed out, Turkey is a democracy. It's an imperfect democracy. It's a maturing democracy. There are multiple reasons why this protest has mushroomed nationally and so on. There are a whole range of grievances and so on. But there's also a bright side to what we're witnessing, which the ambassador pointed out to, and that is the emergence of civil society. It is actually refreshing and encouraging to see this in Turkey. It's part of the maturing process of Turkish democracy, which has a long way to go.
Do you think it has legs? The expression in English, you know? Has it got legs, staying power?
We'll see. Well, see, it's leaderless right now. It is conceivable that the opposition parties, at least the main opposition party, may harness all this energy and so on, but it's too early to say.
Besma, my hunch is you don't like this analogy of a Turkish spring in the way we talked about an Arab Spring a year or two ago.
It is quite different because I think absolutely, Turkey is a democracy and where the other ones were completely dictatorial regimes. But there is some similarity in the sense that these are youth movements. They're young people. They're using a lot of the same social media, the Twitter and Facebook really being the modus operandi to get people to come down to the street. It's not the usual kind of sort of labor movement, if you will. It's very much spontaneous. It's very bottom up. But I think that the one thing that they do kind of share is this global issue of that people want accountability. People want governments that represent them and that are accountable to them and consistently come back to them for feedback. I mean, I think people in Turkey keep saying, yes, we're a democracy, but you can't wait 4 years to come back and ask us permission for these kinds of development changes. We want input now. And I think that's a demand that we're going to see increasingly more global.
Jose, I've only got 30 seconds left here. Has this impacted?
This is uniquely Turkish.
Okay.
Turkish people are inherently democratic. And what they have demonstrated, starting in Gezi Park in Istanbul and then spreading to the rest of the country, is that they want accountability. Besma is absolutely right. I see this, as Tozun has said, as a process of maturation. And I think something fundamentally significant and constructive will come out of this.
In that respect, it's the same as here. People want accountability here too. Yeah, not much different. Okay, thanks everybody for participating in our discussion tonight. Jose Mehmet from Carleton University, Tozun Bashali, King's University College at Western University, Besma Momani at CG in Waterloo, and Nergis Janafe, York University. Appreciate it, everybody.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.